afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Could we please make a start? It is 2 o'clock. I'm pleased to say everyone is here who was going to be here, so thank you very much. Item 1, apologies.
Apologies from Councillor Giles.
Councillor Giles. Item 2, the minutes of a meeting on the 9th of October, which are in the green papers. We just go through quickly page by page. Anything on page 1? Accuracy. Councillor Wilson.
I just have a comment. It's not to do with the accuracy of the minute, but I just thought it would be nice to acknowledge the project, the name of the project. I didn't know whether we could do that.
Well, that's the last paragraph.
You can't add anything. You only deal with the accuracy of the minutes. So I think you can't add anything that didn't actually happen at the end.
Was the project not named?
I don't think so, otherwise we would have put it in.
It was a Prince's Trust, which was a very, very good project for young people out in Wisbech. But in the future, I'll make it clear where I've been and what I've been doing. So, okay. Right. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5, 6, and 7. I should just report on page 7 that the process for the town council engagement has been completed. Okay, nothing else in the minutes. May I sign them as correct record, please? Agreed. Thank you, Michelle. And we now move on to declarations of interest. Sorry, no, my announcements. Only 2 or 3 things to report, I think, since the last meeting. We've had 2 very successful events. One at Parkside, the official opening of the station, at which the Princess Royal came along. Everything went absolutely fine. She was incredibly impressed with what she saw, as were we all. And of course, just before Christmas, we opened Peterborough, and that went very well as well. So they're the 2 events that we've had, and thank you to everybody involved and to all those who arranged them. Thank you. Item 4, declarations of interest. Any declarations? No? Good. Right, now on to the meat of the afternoon, and item 5 is the Fire Authority budget, and this is the first item in the Matthew Warren roadshow. Matthew.
Thank you, Chairman. Members have got an updated budget book should have an updated budget book next to them, and the reason for that is we had the final tax bases coming from District Council, the City Council over the last week, so I've reflected those into the calculations. It doesn't actually change any of the figures. What it does mean is we can get a little bit more money, or we get a little bit more money because housing is slightly ahead of that forecast. And if you see on the front page of 5.2, first page of the covering report, it'd say 265,227 at the pound sign. That's actually the number of houses. That's actually been increased to 265,892 within the budget book itself. So we've got a few more houses than we anticipated that come online. Development across Cambridgeshire. What it leaves us effectively is really the same place as where we were previously. I'm proposing that we freeze council tax next year, accepting the freeze grant that government has issued. The report itself has been through Resources Committee on 2 occasions, first iteration and second iteration, and the Resources Committee endorsed the recommendation to accept the freeze grant. We're assuming the freeze grant will be built into our base funding for future years. Clearly, the risk there is that any future government may choose to change that, but as it stands at the moment, we expect it to be built into the grant allocation moving forward. We did have a grant reduction for the 15-16 financial year, but members, if you go to page 4 of the appendix, so the main budget book, you can see that we've actually had a reduction of £734,000, which is identified as budget holder savings. Those are savings that we've been accruing over the last 4 years, again, which members will be aware of, so through changes in shift systems, changes in support staff structures. We've been able to identify those savings, and those have been taken out for the next financial year. So those have been done without any further savings having to be made. In terms of other key assumptions, you'll see on going back a page onto page 3, we've made some assumptions around inflation. And what we're saying there is pay award inflation for employees is forecast between 0 and 1%, and the rationale for that is we're expecting 1%, but because some people don't get that until partway through the year, hence the reason why they won't get the full amount in that financial year. Other than that, the other key change, everything else is quite standard, I hope, standard year. We'll see what next year brings, but certainly at the moment we're looking to freeze. Really, any questions that members may have, be happy to answer.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Matthew. I'd like to ask, I mean, obviously we're in a good financial position and well managed, and presentation is very clear. But I wonder whether or not you could see in the future a possible situation where perhaps we could reduce our council tax rather than look at increasing it and keeping it flat, whether or not the demand for the service might allow that.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Councillor Chapman. In terms of where, no, I think the short answer is I don't see us reducing council tax. I appreciate that demand for service is going down, but actually in terms of the numbers that we service in terms of whole-time employees, which is where the majority of our costs are, I can't see us wanting to reduce that too much further. Ultimately, this is a response service, and I appreciate that people perhaps aren't occupied all of the time, but actually in some ways it's an insurance policy. So I would anticipate that, if anything, I wouldn't anticipate us having to reduce council tax in the future. I think government cuts will put pay to us being able to reduce, if I'm being honest. But in terms of the projections that I've made that are detailed on page 4 are all around in future years we may need to put council tax up by 2% to help bridge that gap between cuts and funding.
I think also council do perhaps envisage the grant from government reducing even further as well. And this very much chimes into the argument of whether this is a demand-led organisation or whether it's a risk-based organisation. And surely, yes, if we looked at the demand, we might start taking things away, but it's based on risk currently, so there's a quite philosophical debate to be had along those lines.
Councillor Smith.
Thanks. Can I just sort of ask about the assuming that it's going to be built into the base budget?
Yes.
How certain are we of that?
Last year's freeze grant that we took was built in, and all of the indications from the government administration are that it will be built into the grant moving forward. However, I would say if there's a change, that would be the risk, obviously, to the current position. They may choose to remove that in future.
But for the foreseeable future, that's there.
Yeah, but for the foreseeable future, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bywater.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one, Matthew. Just for my own clarity, really, on page 20, we look at IT and communication. We've got quite an extensive programme, as I'm aware of, with the VDI programme that we're looking at the moment. You give 350,000 for each subsequent year.
Yeah.
Can you clarify for me, why is that not decreasing if we're doing our IT process now? And why do we keep the figures consistent through those years?
Part of the challenge that we've had around ICT, certainly over the recent future, is that we never had any form of replacement programme. So we're actually playing catch up as it stands at the moment, and we're having to invest probably proportionally more than we should have had to if we'd have been constantly refreshing our infrastructure. So what this is allowing for is that constant refresh. So, for instance, if we replace a lot of servers in our plant room, actually every 5 years they need replacing. Whereas in the past, what we've done is just waited until the end of their life and had to almost catch up. So this is really around us being proactive now, staying on top of the technology, making sure that we are up to date as we need to be, which is why we put the investment in.
And so just a supplementary to that, do we think that's adequate enough, those figures? Are we happy with those figures, are we, or are we just sort of guesstimating those things?
There is an element of guesstimating at the moment. What we see that as probably a maximum level because of the investment we've made to date. If there was a need that we need to come back to members for more, then clearly we'll make sure that we do that through a due process. But at the moment, we see very clearly where over the next couple of years where we feel the investment is needed, and that should be sufficient.
Okay, thank you.
As we become more reliant on ICT and more reliant on software and applications across the service which we're seeing now, such as the document management system that we use, there is also an increasing demand for more licensing as well, so the costs just tend to escalate. So I actually see ICT as an enabler for greater efficiencies in the back office, in support functions. So a relatively small part of the budget becoming a greater proportion of the budget, if that makes sense, into the future. So ICT related costs I would expect to rise as we become more reliant on it and use it to create more efficiencies elsewhere.
Anyone else? Councillor Shepherd.
This is a philosophical question, really. It springs out of page 11, where we're talking about debt and so on. And my concern is that, as I understand it, it is not possible it is not allowed to supplement revenue from capital. You can't borrow to hold down your council. And I'm concerned that if we continue to fund the capital programme out of capital, then our reserves decrease. And if we were to have a really nasty revenue situation, then we might not have the wherewithal to cope with that out of the pre-existing reserves.
In terms of the general reserve, which is what we would use for any significant hits on revenue, that's sitting at 2.6 million at the moment. So I think that for me is over 10% of the revenue budget, and actually in that sense it's more than adequate, I would suggest, to cope with any particular incident or situation that we may find ourselves in. In addition, we also have a pension reserve, which again would be a hit on revenue if we needed to, and that's sitting at about £900,000. So those two alone, I think, are more than enough to cope with the revenue situation. In terms of other reserves, we've got the earmark reserve for effectively property investment, which was approved back in April, and I think that is where I'm looking to invest in our infrastructure and improve the building stock around the place, to ultimately reduce the burden on ongoing maintenance budgets, particularly property budgets around the place. The other side of it is that we do have a budget within the revenue budget, which is revenue contribution to capital outlay, and what we have there effectively is us financing certain aspects of the revenue of the capital programme through that means. It means that we don't have to borrow. We've got our own operational expenditure that we use to finance that. So I think at the moment it's a relatively balanced position. I don't disagree that it doesn't have to be kept under review, and certainly as we get some of the pressures from central government in terms of grant, then absolutely we need to come back and check whether that's still exactly the right position to be.
Do you think it would be helpful to have policy statements from this meeting, this sort of meeting, about what is appropriate, or do you prefer to take it as it comes?
Personally, I prefer to take it as it comes, in the sense of let's see what the situation is at a particular time, depending on what future pressures government press on us as a final result. I would then like to respond in that way. So on an annual basis, I would like to respond.
Councillor Jamil.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things that we've talked about, this premises, this place, and looking at, if we were to, just for example, sell this place and then move to somewhere else, the money that, if we were to save money, where would that go? Would that go in the revenue? How would that work?
That would be a capital disposal, so it would be capital money, so you have to use it to finance capital expenditure going in the future. So effectively, any proceeds from this sale would be put towards purchasing another sale.
Anybody else wish to contribute? No, in which case can we move to the recommendation, which is on page 17 of that report, items 1 to 7, please. The recommendations are there, hopefully. Those in favour? Those in favour?
It's unanimous.
Unanimous, thank you. Right, thank you, Matthew, for all the work you've done on our budget over the last few months. A great job there, and it's good to know that our finances are in good order, so thank you very much for that. Item 6, draft pay policy statement. Matthew.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. In terms of the draft pay policy statement 2015-16, members can probably recall this time last year when there was quite a lot of discussion around our pay policy statement. It went off to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. They did a full review of it. Councillor Bywater and Councillor Butcher were part of that review. This effectively is a mirror of that statement, but refreshed for the current year or future year position. There have been no changes in terms of that position. A couple of points worth raising. On 2.2.3 on page 3, there's a little asterisk against 21.3%. There should be a footnote that effectively says that that's only paid, that will be paid if to officers that are not re-engaged. That effectively 21.3% is a saving to the authority at the moment because we're not paying employee contributions. So those officers that are retired and come back into service. So that's worth creating that point, that's what that should say. Other than that, everything else is pretty much as it was last year. I don't think there's anything else really to draw members' attention to. There will be obviously changes in terms of the pension scheme arrangements for next year. We do not know at this stage how much the employer contribution rates are going to be for the new firefighter pension scheme. We've asked the question, is it going to be comparable to the 21.3%? And we're told we will not be too far away if that's what our assumption is. So that's as much information as we have at this stage from the government. So I hope that we'll hear over the coming weeks. And really any questions that members might have on that paper.
Councillor Shannons.
Page 2, paragraph 2.12. In addition, a review of principal office pay is undertaken every 3 years. When was the last time this was done, please?
It's currently ongoing. The appointments committee discussed this and a pay review was put in place and Matthew is currently doing the research.
Anybody else? No? Are you then happy to approve the pay policy as attached? No. Agreed, everyone? Agreed. Unanimous, thank you. Item 7, procurement regulations, changing to standing orders. Matthew, it's you again.
Thank you. Okay. Last April, new procurement directives were passed by the EU. Which effectively they're aimed at trying to attract or make it more attractive for small and medium-sized enterprises to engage with us or public bodies in terms of the procurement process. They're trying to rationalise it and take out some of the bureaucracy that change. Government has 2 years in which to implement the change from April 2014. So really I'm looking for us to just get ahead of the game hopefully on this. Or thought I was ahead of the game until yesterday we heard that actually they're looking to implement on the 26th of February this month. which is great, good timing for us. So we are slightly ahead of it, but only by about 2 weeks now. So in terms of the key changes, you'll see in 4.3 abolishment of pre-qualification questionnaires. Quite time consuming, I would suggest, for a supplier to go through that before they even get into the procurement route. Everything is now being moved to if you like, an online process. Again, hopefully making it more accessible for individuals. And again, I suppose the key point for me is now based on the most economically advantageous tender, not just price. So we're now starting to look at the whole package, not just purely price driven in the future, which again could be to the advantage of depending on what they're offering. So that's the key changes. There is a typo that Councillor Shannon's did pick up on page 2. It should be £15,001, not £15,002. So I will preempt him so raising that. But again, you'll see how effectively it's going to change. Everything below £25,000 effectively comes open, and then we have to tender everything above £25,000, which we haven't had to do today. So it's going to be quite an onerous process for us as a public authority, but clearly one that we need to make sure that we do. So if members approve it today, we will start doing it from today, as opposed to waiting 2 weeks for the 26th of February. So.
Councillor Sales.
Thank you, Chair. The time that you should have referred to small contracts, because items below £25,000, where a contract is granted on an oral quote, there is then a written record of that. Please reassure me that that's the case. Otherwise, we could have 3 or 4 of those out of 80 grand, totaling 80 grand, with no record apart from handshake and on-you-go job. But there is a written record.
Every oral quote is followed up with
there's a record of
in a written format. Absolutely, everything's recorded.
Do the same would be true for the contractual. You'd be asked to enter into some sort of undertaking with it.
Yeah, ordinarily we get them signed contract. Yeah. But it's worth. I mean, what Chris is saying is, if you have multiple, so you went to one supplier and said actually 5,000 here, and you had another 10,000 later on, the combination would mean that by default, we now have to look at as much as we can, forecast into the future and say, actually we think this is going to lead there, so it would then mean that we have to pull them in this system.
My reason for asking that is the fact that I'm well aware of the fact that that's an area which has been ripe for exploitation elsewhere.
Anybody else? Councillor Smith.
Can I just mention on page 3, basically the middle square at the top, procedure, discuss, I take it that's most appropriate.
Yes, it is.
Right.
Thank you. Anybody else? No, in which case we'll go back to the recommendation. We're asked to approve the proposed changes. Everybody happy with that? Agreed? Thank you. Number 8, a review of service complaints policy and procedure. Matthew, can I ask on this one, how many complaints do we actually get?
Less than 20 a year. 20 would be a very bad year for the service.
Are they from the same person?
I haven't looked into that. Not that I'm aware of. No, not I'm aware of.
Right. Is there anything more to present on that?
Just many of them, Councillor, are related to, appear to be related to driving issues. Being upset with fire appliances and feeling
going too fast.
Something of that nature. But just because we get 20 complaints we do investigate every one, and some of those will not be found to be up there.
No, I didn't share with Great Cake. I thought you'd probably the same as similar, was it? Get the same one every time.
That happens, I'm sure.
Councillor Sales.
Chair, the complaints are often considered in tandem with positive representations, and I'm fairly sure you must get a lot of letters. Where are they recorded? Because they're a very important indicator of satisfaction of the service. Just a question. Where are they recorded? How many positive representation? In other words, mainly people you've actually rescued, to put it bluntly, people you've rescued, you must have a lot of people. Oh, thanks very much.
We do record them in Sharpie News, as the council said.
Okay, but do they come to us? Because I think it's a really good point, because it is an expression of satisfaction with the service.
Take account of that. Councillor.
Thank you, that's
Sort something out in terms of information.
Anybody else? Sorry. Councillor Sherman.
Just tying down the small print, Chairman. 4.3, anonymous complaints will not be processed, but I hope they would not be ignored.
If there are certain regulations, I'm sure Matthew will cover that if they're financial complaints are anonymous, I think we're probably required and obliged to do. If we're required and obliged to investigate something, we always will, whether it's anonymous or not. But if someone just writes in, as they do occasionally, saying making claims against an individual, they're anonymous.
Right, but I'm thinking of the person who puts in what you and I would consider to be a perfectly reasonable complaint, had they put their name to it. They didn't because they chose not to. That might still be a substantive point, which may not be financial, but we would see if there are any lessons to be learned.
We look at it on a case by case
That's
basis, but we do get the odd vexatious issue which is anonymous, which
and I don't write them all. 5.8, Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
No other action is necessary. That seems to me to be presumably restricted to the person who's receiving.
Yes, it is. It's actually by the executive support team who receive absolutely but the investigation commences.
And then, and my memory may be faulty, but if I go to 6.1, third bullet, it's closely monitor progress of investigation with your time. I'm not sure that sense is replicated with other directions of complaints, and I would hope that thought was that all processes were monitored. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Sayles.
Sorry, Chair, I missed this earlier. Under complaints policy on Appendix 1, acknowledgement is very right at the top. All complaints on receipt as soon as possible, or in any case, will be acknowledged within 2 working days. That strikes me as being very tight. I wonder whether or not it should be 3. 2 is good.
We feel it's really important, Councillor, to acknowledge when someone writes in a complaint, or particularly if they do it by email. It is onerous, but we actually want it to be onerous because it keeps us to a thing where we need to be responding to the public should they have a complaint. And we're not finding it difficult to meet that target currently. So rather than diminish it, I'd like to keep it where it is so that we're fixated on responding quickly to these things.
So you're not going to get a complaint about not responding later.
We may well do, and if we do, we'll bring it back up again.
Thank you.
You send it by first class post, it will take another 3 days.
Anybody else like to contribute? No? In which case we will go for recommendation to approve the revised policy and procedure as appendices 1 and 2 respectively. All agreed? Anybody against? No. Thank you. Moving on nicely to item 9, review of recruitment and selection policy.
Thank you, Chairman. This again has been through Resources Committee, Policy Committee, in a lot of detail. Most of those changes will be incorporated. There will still be some that are outstanding that we need to incorporate. However, we do need to bring it to the authority for them to formally approve. I know Councillor Shellens has already highlighted that we don't talk about control within the policy, although we do talk about every other group of employees that are based in fire authority, so we do need to incorporate those. Other than that, I think really just opening up to any further questions or comments that members that weren't at the policy committee may have.
Councillor Rylance.
I've just got one
when you read on to the next item, there's something which is not mentioned in here. Why is it not mentioned in here that applicants need 5 GCSEs before they can apply for this?
The purpose of this is actually the policy itself wouldn't go into the detail of each individual recruitment because it would depend on the role itself. So what we have is we reserve the judgment that actually based on at the moment for firefighters, obviously we're going down the 5 GCSE route. If that proves in the future that we don't want it, what we wouldn't want is it to be bound in this policy. As such, it would be on an individual basis, hence the reason why we leave it on.
Councillor Shellens?
2 points, if I may, Chairman. Section 2 on page 6 of 18. Advertisement shall carry a closing date which shall be at the end of the 2-week period
From the last posted advert.
I think it should say so. And under 5.1, I think offers, it should be stated here, it's common sense, but we just need to state it for clarity, that offers should be conditional on the provision of satisfactory medical or proper references or all the other things that come after you've made an offer.
So it's subject to clearance, yeah, absolutely. We'll add that.
Councillor Swift?
No, I'm just looking for them.
Okay. Sorry, Councillor Bidey.
Hopefully I'm not looking funny, Chair. A question maybe through you for Jeff actually. It's in relation to page 8 talking about spent convictions in the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act.
Is this important to you?
No, not for me personally, no, but are there any amendments to that act? It's an old piece of legislation, or are there any stated cases that we need to be aware of? Or
What do you mean in relation to exemptions?
yeah.
No, there's been nothing recent. No,
I'm not aware of anything, I just want to ask that
no, there's
question.
been nothing recent. It's been standard for quite some time.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody else? No? Right, so we go to the recommendation to approve the new policy. Agreed? Anybody to the contrary? No? On to item 10 now, please, which is the workforce development strategy. Again, Matthew.
Chairman, if I may, I'm going to ask Rick who chairs the Workforce Development Strategy Group, and we'll ask him to present it on.
Okay, Rick, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Afternoon, members. The strategy in front of you is aimed at setting the direction for the development, maintenance and attraction of a workforce for the future to ensure that we're able to continue to deal with the challenges that the fire and rescue service faces. The strategy in front of you has been out for consultation and we have received the comments back from the representative body. In essence, the direction of the strategy, I'm quite comfortable with. A number of the rep bodies asked for us to add greater emphasis around some of the areas such as leadership and development, which we'll be working with them before we actually publish the strategy to the service. But what I'm asking for today is for yourselves just to be comfortable with the direction that strategy is taking. The strategy has been developed after considering some best practice guidance from the LGA, the local government employers and the Improving Development Agency, and it builds upon the current strategy that was in place from 2009 to 2012. You'll see from the strategy itself that it focuses down on 4 key areas, and the idea of it is to support our work going forward, both with our development partner T3 and also some of the work that the Workforce Development Group that Matthew's talked about is taking forward through that. There's an associated action plan that goes with this strategy, which isn't here today, but I'll be very happy to share that level of detail with any members who may be interested in it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Any comments, please? Councillor Say.
Only just one, Chair, just under organisational development, says that with great certainty we will anticipate change. Just quite interested to know exactly how you're going to do that.
Yeah.
I'm not expecting to.
Well, I think it's a given that change will be coming, and what we can do is use the information that we do have through networks and through members, changing demography, various other things to identify where they might be, budget pressures, etc. So what we know, we can anticipate, and we'll absolutely right that there's certain areas that we should attention.
Tea leaves. That's all. Just a comment about.
Councillor Nestor.
Also on that page, under organisational development, it says we must continue to grow as an organisation. And I suspect what you mean is that we must continue to develop as an organisation. And I suspect it might be better to say that, because continue to grow implies that we will have ever more staff, which I don't think is what we're intending to say.
That's not the intention. The intention is in the development says.
Can you change it so it actually says development?
Councillor Shellings.
Thank you. I would like to just put something in here for those people who recognise that they've advanced as far as they are going to be able to, given their personal development, years and whatever, and they're still valued. And I've got, we shall respect and value those employees who recognise that they are unlikely to proceed to a higher level in the organisation. Not everybody is going to become a field marshal.
I think that's a really, really important point, and it's something actually that representative bodies have also picked up about, making sure it's very clear this isn't just about brushing upwards, it's also about lateral development, and we're very aware of that sort, but I think you're right, we can reflect that better than the one of those areas.
All happy to implement that? Yeah. Anybody else like to contribute? No? In which case we go to the recommendation, we're asked to approve the workforce development strategy as attached to Appendix 1. Everybody agreed? Anybody against? No. Thank you. We now move to item 11, which is the paper that came separately from the main body on pension scheme update. Matthew.
Thank you. I want to cover 2 points really. Transitional arrangements that government are consulting upon for the new firefighter pension scheme that will go live on the 1st of April 2015, and there's local pension boards, which I will give an overview of. In terms of the transitional arrangements, you'll maybe pick up 4.6 of the paper. A lot of this is already really in the legislation, and actually what they're asking is not, I don't feel, is something that's within the gift of us to change anyway. So actually all I've done is commented on whether or not it's actually accurate or not. And that's having read through it, I don't really feel that there's not more we can add to the consultation. So I've been to engage yes or no answers and expecting to whether or not we're going to meet the requirements that they've set out. In a sense, the key changes, I mean, what they're saying is really that there's not an awful lot of change to the protection that they're giving for firefighters that are either within the last 10 years of their service. They can retire and stay in the old pension scheme. If they're not, but they're of a certain age, they'll get some transitional protection, which means that they'll be able to continue paying into the old pension scheme with those rights until a certain date. And then there's the scheme members that are in 2006 scheme that they can transfer. And again, in terms of that transitional protection, there's not many people that are affected in terms of whether they're in the last 10 years. The scheme only came into play in 2006. So, other than that, there's not really an awful lot more to add. There is, they are trying to simplify. If somebody goes out as a result of an ill health or an injury award, they're trying to simplify that in the 2015 scheme to make sure it comes under one set of legislation rather than 2 or 3. So, really, that's as much as I really want to say in terms of the consultation. I've put in Appendix 2. I've been through it. Said yes. Do I agree? Yes, we'll meet the deadline that was already set previously. There's a couple of other yeses and then a no. To be honest, it really is, it's already there in black and white. I don't think it's going to change irrespective. So, hence the reason why I've asked it as I have. In terms of the local pension boards, the focus really from government is to make them more transparent, or pensions more transparent. And in a sense, we're looking to establish a local pensions board which will consist of members of the scheme, firefighter pension scheme, and members from the service or the authority in our case. However, I think we're just concerned in terms of how it will actually operate in reality, because looking at the legislation as it's set out so far, is that if you are a member of a fire authority that makes a decision over pensions, then you can't sit on the board. So that is all fire authority members, as it stands at the moment, which will mean that we need the independent members to come in and sit on the board. Likewise, officers will not be able to sit, or I certainly wouldn't be able to sit on the board, because actually I bring papers to you to make a decision. So actually I will not be able to sit on the board either. So who's going to sit on the board, we're not absolutely sure as yet. We were hoping to have a joint board with Northamptonshire, because actually they through LGSS. However, it appears that that isn't going to be possible, because it may be that you apply different discretions, whether you're in Northamptonshire or in Cambridgeshire. And if you do, then actually you need separate boards. So I was trying to establish a joint board, but I don't think that's necessarily going to be an option. It appears that all fire and rescue services are in the same place. Nobody's actually established a board as yet. Terms of reference need to be established by the 1st of April, but the board doesn't necessarily need to have met by the 1st of April. So what I'm proposing is, if you delegate the power to me to go away, establish terms of reference, and then at least have it in place for the 1st of April, and then from that point on we'll work out how we implement in the new financial year. What we're being told is CLG won't be looking at it straight away. It will be a good few months before we start looking at the boards have actually met. But we're working as a group of fire rescue services to try and establish the most appropriate way of driving this pension board forward. And just one other point on the pension board, they will not be a decision-making body either. So they're going to sit there and look at the administration arrangements of local pension scheme administrators.
Councillor Rides.
Thank you, Chair. Do you just want to qualify your words, we are looking to set up, and make that the government has told us we've got to set up?
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, we have to do it. It's within the regulation.
Councillor Smith.
Thanks. The board, would there be a cost to the board for the board members? What sort
Potentially.
of money is?
Yeah, potentially we may need to, if it's independent, we may need to pay. We need to establish a budget for that as well. It won't be huge amounts. We're only talking twice a year these people meet, but it's still going to be a cost. Yeah, potentially, absolutely. Which this authority will have to, this authority will have to.
That's it. And I felt basically mentioned you'd set it, or you'd look to set up the terms of reference in
Yes.
consultation with the chairman of the fire authority. Yeah?
Yes, fine. Yeah, absolutely.
Councillor Nessinger.
I just wondered whether you're working closely with the LGA and Fire Commission on this, because if it is something that everybody's going to do, it's a bit daft to be inventing the wheel here.
Yeah, absolutely. The LGA have been quite proactive in this, and what they've done recently is appoint a central pensions advisor for fire and rescue services on the back of the changes to the firefighter plans. So we're working, and the lady is called Claire Alcock, and we're working closely with her. And we went down to meet with her last week in London just to get that consensus view. But at the moment, everybody's in the same place. And it's like, what benefits is going to give? So I think we need to establish what that is and how it will work, and then I'll present something back.
Thank you.
Councillor Shans.
Thank you, Chair. I've been party to some deliberations about this in another place, and I don't think I'm going to be able to say anything very constructive. This is just a whinge from me. This is complete nonsense. It's an additional level of theoretical bureaucracy, which may be extremely hard to deliver, because I cannot see what's in it for the people who are going to consider this blessing law. Either you're going to have people there who are there because of the money, which is the worst possible motive, or else we were warned that there would be serious training requirements. That's onerous, and it also requires a certain level of intelligence, which I don't think I have, frankly. You're talking about arcane regulations written in code with huge levels of jargon, and it's a complete turn-off, and I can't even make a decision at the end of it. So I think it's entirely possible that this will just fall in their heap. I hope it does. I feel better now, Chair. Thank you.
Anybody else who'd like to make a contribution? No? No. Well, the recommendation is to note the position, approve the arrangements, and approve the proposed response consultation. All those in favour? All right. Right, so unanimous. Reluctantly approved.
It is.
Okay. Nobody against?
I'm just wondering whether it's worth us writing a letter to say that there seems to be consensus around the table that this is a completely pointless piece of legislation. I just wondered whether we should just write a short note to government to say.
Yeah. I'll instruct them to go along with the consultation response.
Thank you.
I quite enjoy it drafting.
I will very much.
Okay, let's move on to item 12, which is the review of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Fire Authority compliance with Fire and Rescue National Framework. This was a piece of work undertaken by Councillor Butcher's Scrutiny Committee, so I'll ask you to present the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This review was brought forward by the peer review. If you look on page 5 to the review objectives, the objectives of the review were to examine the evidence required to assure the Fire Authority that it complied with all requirements of the National Framework for Fire and Rescue Service. Well, I believe then, looking up at 1.2, what the peer review was actually saying in plain English, he thought that us as members signed it off without really knowing what we was talking about. That's the feeling I got, so we decided to have this review. And thanks to Tracy Raby and Councillor Bywater, we had the review. She presented us with a pack about 5 inches deep of paperwork, which I thought, that's a fortnight now of reading, but thanks to the way that she referenced it, it made life easier for us. And as you can see on the executive summary of findings, we did find some things there and we found some recommendations. And if you move to page 15, you can see the conclusion of that review. Based on the information provided today, members are assured that the authority is meeting all requirements of the Fire Service National Framework for England. Through undertaking this review, members have a much greater understanding of the national framework and the service integrated risk management. And there's some recommendations below that. So that's about all I've got to say, but I would ask through you, Mr. Chairman, if I could ask Councillor Bywater if he'd like to add anything.
Councillor Bywater.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a quick observation really that I'd like to bring to members' attention really on page 11 to do with the gap analysis really. I mean, I think the report's very easy to understand and obviously it's got our views all the way through it, but so if you look at 5.6.4, it's something I raised in the Scrutiny Committee. To date, the services have not identified any capability gaps that cannot be met. However, obviously in the future, if any gaps are identified, the current arrangements to highlight these capability gaps to the Strategic Resilience Board are not clear in terms of reference. I'm just a little bit concerned about that going forward. Should we have to use the Strategic Resilience Board? And I use an example of potential major incidents when we do cross-training with the police and ambulance service. We do the training, but the feedback that we get as members are they successful? What sort of feedback that we get in really? So that's one issue that maybe the members need to speed with really. The Chief might be able to give me some feedback on that now really.
This links, I think, Councillor, into the work of the local resilience forum particularly we're getting feedback to members about how we're doing and how our general resilience and our multi-agency training and preparation, warning and informing work is ongoing. The local resilience forum has achieved quite a lot, but we've just had a change of chairman. I'm now the chairman of the local resilience forum. We are putting a new governance structure around the local resilience forum, much like we have here for our programme board and our project management. So we have a circular process of requiring work to be done, what the scope of that is, and then bringing it back and bringing the results out and that continuing gap analysis. And I think one area that's been sadly lacking in the current local resilience forum is that feedback to members who sit, whether it's in the Fire Authority, whether it's the PCC's office, whether it's district councils and the county councils. So hopefully through that governance structure and through the employee that the local resilience partners are going to fund, who will sit here within our structure certainly during the period that I'm chairman, I do see a far more engaging process, a far more governed process as well.
Councillor Shepherds.
4 points, Chairman, 2 of which I think are very quick. On the second page of the executive summary, where it says national resilience, third box across, there is a lack of clarity about the arrangements to highlight capability gaps to the Strategic Resilience Board. I'm not sure I fully understand that. I've lost everybody. Well, and how it's going to work. The arrangements to highlight capability gaps.
Can I come in there, Chair? Sure. Okay. I think it was something that we picked up on, Ralph and myself, is that I don't think the Strategic Resilience Board's actually made a decision, has it, if I'm correct in my memory? No. So I think it's just about if there is a decision for them to be made, who sits on that and who's involved in it, really.
Right, thank you. On page 5, para 1.4, me being picky, the last word says qualified, and I wonder whether that would be better as substantiated.
Views, members?
As chairman, I'm quite happy with the wording. I think it's just different words that's meaning the same thing. So that's
on page 13. Starting bottom of 12, moving forward, the assessment of risk will be undertaken on an annual basis and fed into the corporate planning process. When's that likely to happen?
the corporate planning, that's going on all the time. And I think with what we're looking at, if I think I've got your question correctly, what I talked about earlier on with the folder that Tracy Raby got ready for us, there was a lot of information in there, a real one. You've all got access to this through the internet or through other things. We thought it would be a good idea to have that here somewhere. You wouldn't want to carry it about with you, but if people wanted to look at it, then they could look at it and read it and keep up to date. Because everything in there is a work in progress that changes.
So it's ongoing, it's continuous.
Yeah.
Right,
Well, that's how I see it.
Good. And finally, if I may, 621, there's a reference to DFA, which will obviously mean more to some people than to me.
Pass.
It should be CFA.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? No? In which case, we appear to have considered the findings, and it's ongoing work. And are there any recommendations you want to make? Or are you just happy with that? Happy to let it go? Thank you. Okay. Agenda,
Can I ask one thing? That's the piece of work that you've done now, but will we then, are there going to be actions for this, for the fire authority as a result of that piece of work?
I don't think there's going to be actions necessarily for the fire authority. I think the actions following the officers to ensure that you are better informed through the year in order to be assured when you're required to be assured, so we actually meet the framework.
So
we're not going to bring something once a year to you.
Right.
We're going to feed the information more regularly.
Thank you.
So just on the strategic resilience, it's being picked up. The national framework talks about every fire and rescue service as it goes through its REP process should identify gaps it believes it has in terms of national resilience. And if it identifies a gap, it should flag that to the Strategic Resilience Board at a national level to consider how that may occur. The issue is that Strategic Resilience Board has never sat. So I think the point that came out of the review was actually, if we identify a gap, we need to have some idea about how we raise that to the national level, and I'm currently looking into some of that stuff now. Neil and I look to refresh the REP process this year, so that carries that huge.
Thank you.
okay, in which case we'll now move on to item 13, and again, Councillor Butcher, would you like to introduce your report, after which we'll have some discussion. I will ask the CFO to update us on the current arrangements for the next round of strikes.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you can see, the review objectives on page 4 assess the effectiveness of the business continuity arrangements for industrial action today, report on the impact of these arrangements on both staff and the organisation, report on the cost of the industrial action up until including the 21st of July. We decided to do this review of scrutiny because they had been going on, I think, roughly about 12 months at the time. These 2-day strike, 3-day strike, 24-hour strike. So we thought we'd review to see how our resilience was. And once again, you can see from the conclusion on page 12 what we arrived at, and also on the early pages were the executive summary findings and recommendations. These have been back to the scrutiny committees, all of these have been approved by the scrutiny committees.
Councillor Bywood,
Well, no, just really to summarise by the conclusion, and I think the report's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, what I would like to sort of thank publicly is for everybody who's involved in the strike action. It's a difficult time for everybody involved, the senior management team and those involved in the strike action. So I think everybody involved dealt with it very professionally, and let's hope we can, if we're faced with this challenge again, everybody can keep to that track really.
Thank you for that, Simon, I agree. I think that is in the conclusion of 9.3, that is where we did appreciate everything that all members done, those that were working and those that were on strike.
thank you. Again, would like to comment on the report? Councillor Sayers.
So it's not so much a comment about the report, it's about some information that's contained within the report, which is that this whole edifice, which was not of our making, was cost us 300 grand. You know, we didn't fight with anybody, and it's been forced on the finance because it's a decision, and it's cost us not an arm or a leg, it's cost us a lot of money, which we could use to pay. It's a grumble.
You feel better?
Yeah, a bit.
Yes,
Right.
better for it. Right, okay. Would anybody else like to comment on the report? Councillor Shelley.
Two sets of, or two acronyms, Chairman, ERD and ORH.
ORH,
Yes.
sorry.
ORH are government consultants that we have used over a number of years to assist us with our emergency planning scenarios. They hold our emergency cover model.
And then picking up on Councillor Sales's point, looking at that table, some of that money is cash, but I suspect that some of it is not cash. So I suspect that the cost of the service through time is not an extra cash payment, although the time lost is that extra. So we're actually, in cash terms, we're looking at under 20,000, if all of the top line were.
Anyone else?
The top one, you're absolutely right, that's just diverting people away from the budget. The rest of it are actually costs.
If no one else wishes to comment, can I ask the Chief, please, just to bring us up to date with the latest arrangements for any cover in respect of future strike?
As members will be aware, the FBU ran a very successful campaign a little while back to secure an early day motion or a debate in the Houses of Parliament off the back of an early day motion with regard to the 2015 regulations. During that debate, the FBU contend that the Fire Minister Penny Mordaunt and Eric Pickles, the Secretary of State, made what was effectively statements guaranteeing that under all circumstances a firefighter who was not capable of carrying on their work as a firefighter after the age of 55, who couldn't be redeployed, would effectively walk away with a pension. And they would contend that the vote to keep the regulations in place following that debate was swayed by that guarantee. We've since had letters from the Fire Brigades Union, as we have across the country, asking fire authorities how they intend to change policy and operate that guarantee. We have, of course, taken some legal advice through the local government association, and that legal advice is, as we thought, we have a discretion in this matter. We have to legally operate that discretion, and that discretion under no circumstances can be fettered. So the guarantee that the Fire Brigades Union seeks doesn't exist. We've responded to the Fire Brigades Union, making it clear that unless the regulations change, then the had a recall conference, I think, on Tuesday of this week. And some of you who may have looked at the BBC website will see they have announced that they will call another 24-hour strike. We don't have notification of what day that's going to be. So, unfortunately, the dispute still rumbles on a little. Obviously, we are planning contingency arrangements. We have a date in mind that we think might well be the date they will choose when there is a planned national demonstration outside the Houses of Parliament on, I think it's Wednesday, week 25th or something of that nature. So we're planning around those dates. Obviously we won't know for certain until such time as the FPU announces. Planning has already started. Our contingency arrangements during that week will be strong. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments? No? Right, in which case we'll now move on then to item 15, which is constitutional changes, and I asked... Sorry? 14. Oh no, this is one. 14, which is the performance review of Multistar. Ralph, this is yours again.
Yes, thank you, Peter. Once again, this review was brought about because those of you who remember when the Multistar was first introduced, or car as it was then, it had a lot of problems, a lot of breathing problems, things weren't working as they should. There was a review done, I believe, probably 3 years ago on this, and this review was decided to be done because it was agreed that all the work had been done, the 12 months had passed, and work and different things had been done, and the Multistar was back in operation, so we concluded this review. And as you can see on page 11, the conclusions, I won't go through them, you can read those, and this did go back and was approved by Scrutiny Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Butcher. Councillor Peach.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it's interesting. I'd just like the committee to be aware, several of the Peterborough members went to the Dogsall and standalone fire stations, and we had quite a chat with the crews there, and particularly at the stand ground. We were shown around the Multistar, and now it is more than satisfactory in its performance. Certainly it wasn't when it was first purchased and it had to be away and sort of reconfigured for it, and they all seem to think it was now working absolutely fine and a really good piece of equipment.
Councillor Shelley.
Two very quick points, Chairman. Sorry, firstly, this looks like a good news story, so I'm very pleased about that. 4.1, there's reference to dual function, and I'd quite like to know what those are. And then, secondly, my war on acronyms, 69 IPDS.
4.1, I presume I can answer that one. With its dual function, it means it can do what turntable ladder's done, and it also does what a normal pump does, I presume. Perhaps officers would like to put me right.
Yeah, Councillor Butcher's absolutely right. It does have a dual function. It can operate as a fire engine, as you would expect, with pumping water. It also operates. It's not a turntable ladder, so I'm not going to call it a turntable ladder. It's a Multistar, but it has, very similar operations.
Councillor Sayles.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Chair. IPDS.
Integrated Personal Development System.
Thank you.
Training records and competence-based.
We need an anthology. We need a list of all that. It would be very helpful. There's so many. Just a comment here on page 11, the bottom of page 11. Page 4. Based on the findings of this review, members recommend that the fire authority is now in a position to implement its decision that the turntable ladders at Cambridge and Dogsall be removed from service. Has a risk assessment of that decision and the implications that have been carried out?
Risk assessment was carried out back in 2011. So what we did promise at 2011, those members who were here in 2011 will recall, there were substantial problems with the Multistars at that time. And what I promised to members is that we would expect to see when the Multistars returned from Germany that there would be at least 12 months of consistent operational service before we came back to the issue of whether or not, or whether it was the timing was right to replace the turntable ladders with multi-stars, as was always the initial intention. Timing has been such, and issues have been such, that actually the time we've had now has been nearly 2 years in operation. So we feel confident now, as the TLs approach the end of their life, their operational life, which I believe one is just about there, or both just past their operational life, that we wouldn't be recommending to the authority that they replace those vehicles, that the multi-star is now our primary aerial appliance.
So there is, my question was, whether a risk assessment has been done.
The risk assessment was done back in 2000 and...
Yeah. 2011, when we brought the package of measures to the
I didn't remember.
Councillor Rylance.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to say thank you to Tracy Raby for adding these case studies, because they've shown me what the multi-star can do. That's given me far more insight than any of the paperwork before. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I'm pleased, Chair, to see that on 7 to 8 that after their initial experience with multi-star and all this thought, the crew, the training has provided the crew with enlightenment. It's just a quaint choice of words. I quite like enlightenment. I wish I could just get it to track. I've given them that up many years ago.
Right, well, Councillor Chapman.
Sorry, can I quickly ask the TLs, when they're removed from service, are they mothballed, disposed of, parked in the corner? What happens to them?
We will try to sell them, to be perfectly honest, but in fact they're not worth a lot of money, and it is difficult to dispose of that type of vehicle, so they may end up going abroad as some form of donation or gift.
Good. Good luck. Right, okay. Are you all content with our report, and have you noted the conclusions? And do we agree with them? Yeah. Agree? Thank you very much. Now we go to item 15, which is the constitutional changes. Jeff Taylor, please.
Chairman, this starts off with the Resources Committee at its last meeting, suggesting that we should combine both the existing policy and resources committee together into one meeting, because through lack of business, it's really should make sense. I think politicians are suggesting it should be combined together. They did the previous, on the 18th of December, the meeting in the morning had been cancelled through lack of business ended. So as you can see here, I've suggested that because the existing overall scrutiny committee is 8 members, the new policy and resources should be 9, which then covers 17 the total membership of the final point. And I've set out 5.1 the breakdown to the various political groups. I also suggest if you have a membership of 9, there should be a quorum of 3. If you look at the appendix, I've actually just combined everything together. The only difference I've made is on page 3 at the top, Roman 2 and 3. I've actually suggested that you can actually determine certain matters in relation to rates of pay, conditions of service for employees, and as you see in 3, the policies, procedures and all matters relating to recruitment, retention and health and safety for employees. This would give the committee the power to actually determine that without it coming here for determination. So I'm suggesting a small amount of delegation might be appropriate, but you may say evident discipline here. There will be a knock-on effect on the members' allowance scheme, because at the moment there are two SRAs, special responsibility allowances, allocated, one for the policy committee chairman, one for the resources. So I'm suggesting just one, which is an obvious thing to make a suggestion about it. So you will see the recommendations listed in 2, one follows on from the other. Because we're not suggesting any changes to the other numbers in relation to the other committees and political makeup, technically, if you look at all the total number of seats on committees and how they're allocated to political parties, the Liberal Democrats should actually cede one seat to the Conservative. But to do that will change the makeup of a lot of the other committees. So I'm suggesting that we stick with what we're suggesting, and provided nobody votes against that, it can go through legally. So if you're happy with that, I'd ask you to do the recommendations.
Comment, please. Comment? Councillor Shellens.
Thank you for this, Jeff, and I'm talking about the general paper and not your last comment. I just want to be clear what it is that this committee can decide of its own right. I think you touched on that. And it's the assumption that everything else has to be ratified by this meeting.
Correct.
And I think it should say that. I didn't see it in
It's in the rest of the delegation scheme,
Right.
which I've not brought the whole thing to you, but at the very beginning, it sets out exactly what the final authority itself has to determine, and I'm not interfering with any of that. But some things, quite minor matters to do with staffing, etc.
Yeah,
I think
right.
it might be appropriate to deal with that.
I was
So it's not
suggesting that this paper
not changing
might help if
anything.
you could have a short statement to that effect.
Can do.
Anybody else? I'd just like to make the comment that broadly I'm in favour of this, but what I don't want to see, because the other two committees, the agendas were quite light, I don't want people to see this as a thing that members aren't interested. I want to see the general purposes of the agenda, or the new committee, really get some teeth and meat, so that members can continue to have a real say in the authority. I think it's important. I'm sure Councillor Shellens, we're never going to be out of meaty subjects to talk about, but I just want to make that clear. I think
You're going to minute that?
Pardon? No, you might have me up to library or whatever it is. So, are we all broadly in favour of that?
Yes.
Yes, everyone agree? Great, thank you. So we're now moving on then to items for information, and item 17 of 16. Appointments to committees. This is the updated list, which will of course change after the annual meeting in May, with the policy and resources being combined. Michelle, is there anything you want to say?
Yes, just to let members, well, actually group leaders know, what I'll do is I'll do a revised list and circulate that round so that when we have the next fire authority, we can then approve the membership of the new committee.
So perhaps you'll all put your thinking caps on about which committees you want to be represented on when we come back after May, if ever we come back after May. Right, okay. So that's 16. 17 is the operational assessment and resulting action plan from the peer review. So can I ask Rick, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, members, you've got in front of you the peer review report from the operational assessment, which is the assessment that we underwent in September, led by Andy Fry for Peterborough, Berkshire and Group of Peers, which was the assessment that we required to under the national framework once every 3 years. You've got that report that came back, and I know many members have already seen that. And attached to that, we've also got our action plan, which is the areas that we feel we need to take forward and improve upon as a result of the feedback we received from that peer team. We've also got the more recent, as in November, the equality peer review, which was undertaken by a separate peer team that looked at our progress towards achieving excellence with the equalities arena for local government. The associated action plan with the equalities peer review we're currently working through with LGA because there's a time frame on that for us to meet the award of the excellence, and we're just working with them at the moment to understand the amount of work we need to do in the planning meeting that which the chairman was at the other day. Once we've got the detail of that, I will share it with you. But within the report, you will see the areas where they're looking to see us improve. The actual detail of that I need to work through still with the LGA and the PSA. So there's the three reports that we've got. I'm quite happy to take any questions around either the reports or the action plans, or if there's any areas you feel we've missed within the action plan, please let us know. Thanks, Sharon.
Any comments, please? Councillor Wright.
Thank you,
Yes, anyone who applies for whole time?
It also applies to
It applies to whole time. Not on call.
There has been an issue with on-call staff relating to the introduction of the requirement of 5 GCSEs. Oh, for whole-time advice.
Yeah, that's for on-call staff wishing to apply for whole time. So what we did is we looked at the criteria that we need to set as an organisation. And 5 GCSEs were set. Firstly, because the national test that people have to go through are set at GCSE Maths and English. So what's happened in the past is we've not set any standards, so we get loads of people, and we're talking thousands of people applying, and we have quite a limited capacity to deal with those people. So we looked at the qualifications that they would need to get through those tests, and those two qualifications were very clear, and I think other services around the country also looking at that. We also looked at the general range of qualifications we'd like for our firefighters, bearing in mind it's a professional job, and that's why we set it at 5. So as a consequence of that decision, that's actually helped us to narrow down the pool by a means that actually is relevant to the job, as opposed to using other methods. So I could give an example of another service that's quite near us to the north, who have an electronic system, and there was 500 places for that application process, and the reality was the people who got through to the first stage were those who had the fastest broadband connection. So we wanted to limit it in a way that actually reflected the job that we were advertising, and that actually was very successful in our last process, which is why we're carrying it through to future processes.
Yes. Thank you. If an on-call firefighter decides he wants to be full-time, whole-time, but he hasn't got those 5 GCSEs, but he's got training, and he's still with that fire industry?
Yes, we set it's the standard for anybody who wants to join, whether they're on call or whether they're whole time. And the reason for that is the whole time job requires more in the way of qualifications than the on call job, because there's a much broader range of things that we ask our whole time staff to do. So they have a much greater degree of specialism that's required. So therefore the standard is slightly higher. What we do as a service is those staff who are in the on-call who would like to join and haven't got the qualifications, we are looking at ways that we can support them to actually achieve the qualifications they would need to become a whole-time member staff.
Thank you.
Any other comments, please? Right, well, are you happy that we note that report? Okay, thank you. We'll now go to item 18, which is the green paper on the minutes of the Policy Committee of 28th of January. Are we happy with those? And the minutes of the resources meeting on the 17th of December.
Chairman.
Sorry.
My fault. 53 on page 2. It was also agreed it would be helpful for members to have an annual report on some of the exercises that have taken place, e.g. multi-agency exercises. Is that being programmed in?
It hasn't yet. No, it hasn't yet. It picks up on Castle File.
I think I mentioned it earlier.
Are you happy, Mike? Okay. And then we go on then to the Resources Committee on the 17th of December. Okay, so it's the 18th. Anything? No? Councillor Shannons.
The same member also asked whether the vehicle was due to narrow building state roads. That was the question. What was the answer?
Shall I answer? I can remember, but I mean, the answer is that actually modern estates are built to accommodate fire engines, and therefore we don't need smaller vehicles. So yes, it is the current vehicle fund spec is fine, because actually modern roads, the roads on new estates are capable of accommodating fire engines. I think that was the response.
Yes, if we determine to purchase smaller appliances, which we may do for any number of reasons, they will be purchased in place of our normal replacement fire engines. So Matthew's normal process of budgeting for keeping our operational fleet as modern, as effective as it can be, will be sufficient, because we won't do both.
Anybody else? No? No. Well, that formally concludes the business of the meeting. Colleagues, I just would like to say before we close, I don't think we're likely to meet again before May. So all of those of you who are involved in it, I wish you mark my word, I wish you well. And look forward to seeing you all again at the AGM next time.